Today's question: what if Ned Stark sent John to Barristan, Selmy? The letter Ned writes is sealed, to be opened only if Ned dies. John trains in the Kingsguard yard without knowing his own name. And on day 22, in King's Landing, he stops in front of a portrait of Rhaegar Targaryen and stands there for 4 minutes without knowing why. Barristan sees it from the corridor. He goes back to his chambers and puts his hand on the lockbox, then takes it away. Let's get into it. The candle had burned down twice. Ned didn't notice. He wrote the way he did everything, without hesitation once the decision was made, and with the full weight of understanding what the decision cost. 3 letters over 5 years. That was the correspondence. Careful, oblique, designed to survive being opened by the wrong person. He had told Barristan Selmy nothing of the truth. He had kept the connection the way a man keeps a path through forest, clear enough to walk, hidden enough to deny. Now he wrote the real letter, the one that named the boy for what he was. He sealed it in wax. The Stark direwolf first, pressed into the gray. Then the ring he had never shown anyone, an old ring, Targaryen work. The 3-headed dragon barely visible beneath the wolf once the wax cooled. He wrote the instruction on the outer fold in his own hand, not to be opened unless Eddard Stark is dead. He sat with it for a moment, and then he stopped sitting with it, because there was nothing more to think. The decision had been made 16 years ago in a tower in Dorne, in a room that smelled of blood, beside a woman who had made him promise. He sent for John before dawn. The boy came in, still half-dressed, sleep in his face, his dark hair loose. He stood in the doorway of the solar and looked at Ned with the particular wariness of someone who has learned to read trouble in the hour it arrives. Ned told him, "There is a knight in King's Landing, the finest knight in the realm, and serving him will teach you more than the wall ever could. The bastard's name, John Rivers, will protect you until I come south and explain more." John looked at him. Is this punishment? Ned looked at his nephew, this boy who had Lyanna's brow and Rhaegar's jaw, and somehow, impossibly, the gray eyes of the North, and said the truest thing he had said in 16 years. "It is the only protection I know how to give you." John left before Robert arrived. He did not look back at Winterfell's gates. That too was Ned's doing. He had raised a boy who moved forward, always forward, who treated the past the way Ned treated it himself, as something to be honored, not inhabited. In King's Landing, Barristan Selmy received the public letter, the one with no truth in it, and read it twice. Then he looked at the boy standing in the training yard, straight-backed, saying nothing, which was already unusual in a court presentation, and asked him one question. "Can you take an order you believe is wrong and carry it out anyway?" John said no. Barristan studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "Good. Neither can I. You'll do." He locked the sealed envelope in his personal lockbox that evening. He kept looking at the boy's face across the yard and thinking, I have seen that jaw before. He did not yet know where. He would know very soon, and it would change everything, and he would spend 3 months deciding what to do about it. Barristan started with what the boy already knew and found the flaw in its foundation. This was his method with every squire. What he found in John was not the flaw he expected. The skill was real. The boy could fight, had been taught well by someone who understood what fighting was for. But beneath the skill was something rarer. Consequence. When John sparred, He fought as if the other person was real. He pulled strikes that most squires landed freely. He pressed attacks that created openings without exploiting them. Barristan recognized the habit and did not correct it. He did the same thing himself. He began to think of John as something he had not encountered since his own youth, a boy who had been taught to fight by someone who understood why. The court was harder to navigate. Joffrey moved through the Red Keep with the careless cruelty of a boy who had never been told no by anyone who mattered, and Jon watched him with the stillness of someone raised to recognize cruelty and taught that cruelty without cause was the worst kind. He watched Cersei, the way she read every room. He watched Littlefinger, the way he read every person. He said nothing about any of it to Barristan, but Barristan watched Jon watching and found the assessments accurate. On Jon's 22nd day in King's Landing, Barristan saw him stop. The portraits of the Targaryen royal line had hung in that corridor since before Robert's rebellion. No one had moved them. Removing them would have been a kind of acknowledgement. Jon stood before the portrait of Prince Rhaegar and did not move for 4 minutes. A painter's assistant, working nearby, glanced between Jon's face and the canvas and looked quickly away. Jon did not notice this. Barristan, passing on his way to the yard, stopped walking. From his angle, Jon's profile against Rhaegar's silver hair and violet eyes, the resemblance was not something he could explain away. Not bone structure, not coloring. Something structural in the way the face was assembled, in the set of the brow, in the line of the jaw. That evening, Barristan went to his lockbox. He put his hand on the lid. He kept it there for a long time. Then he took it away. He went to the yard and worked alone. Until dark, the letter stayed sealed. Ned Stark was still alive. Robert saw Jon the way Robert saw most things, loudly, briefly, and not nearly deeply enough. He caught the boy disarming a much larger squire in the training yard. A clean move, efficient, wasting nothing, and clapped him on the shoulder and called him a fine lad, and asked whose get he was. Jon said, "Rivers, no house." Robert laughed his complete, brief laugh and told Barristan, standing 6 feet away, that the boy had Ned Stark's grim eyes, and moved on. Barristan did not visibly react. Jon, who had Ned Stark's grim eyes, because Ned Stark had raised him, took this as a comment on his character and filed it away. Robert would not think about the encounter again. Barristan would think about little else for a week. Cersei was more careful than Robert and had been looking at faces longer. She observed Jon twice in the same fortnight, once in the yard, once at a court supper, and what she registered was not Rhaegar exactly, but something in the bone structure that did not match the river's name or the northern accent. She asked Littlefinger, casually, who the Selmy boy was. Littlefinger said he didn't know. He said it the way Littlefinger said things he already knew, pleasantly, with an eye toward the future favor he intended to collect. He was already investigating. Cersei kept her face pleasant and added it to the long list of things she was watching. Ned Stark arrived to take the handship on a gray morning, dust on his riding clothes, and the first person he saw privately, by arrangement, before any ceremony, was Barristan Selmy. They had not been in the same room since Robert's rebellion. They were 15 years older, and in a city that had not improved either of them. Barristan looked at Ned for a long moment and said, "He's extraordinary." Ned said, "I know. I have not opened the letter. I know that too. Thank you." A pause. Barristan said the thing he had been holding for 3 months. He stood in front of Rhaegar's portrait for 4 minutes. He didn't know he was doing it. Ned's expression did not change. Barristan watched the cost of keeping it still move through the man like water through stone. Invisible at the surface, felt in everything underneath. "Keep training him," Ned said. "Keep the letter sealed." He looked at Barristan. "And keep Cersei away from him." The formal curriculum was swordsmanship, riding, lance work, the laws of knightly combat. The informal curriculum was everything else. Barristan taught Jon in the evenings, after the yard was empty, in whatever chamber was available. Sometimes his own rooms, sometimes the small library adjoining the Kingsguard quarters. Once in the Sept, when nowhere else was quiet, he taught the history of the Kingsguard, the responsibilities of protection, the difference between serving a command and serving a purpose, and, most unusually, the history of the Targaryen dynasty, from Aegon's conquest to the end of the Mad King's reign. He framed all of it as history a knight should know. Jon absorbed it as something else. He asked once, carefully, why they spent so much time on the Targaryens. Barristan said, "Because everything about the realm we serve traces back to them. Understanding the root helps you understand the tree." Jon accepted this. He had begun to notice that Barristan always had a second reason for everything. He had not yet decided whether this was a quality he admired or feared. In the court, Jon had, without meaning to, made himself useful in ways that extended past his duties. He had an instinct for the moment before violence, the half-second in which a situation was about to turn. He stepped between Joffrey and a servant boy without being asked. He was present when Sandor Clegane roughly handled a page, and something in the way Jon stood, not threatening, simply refusing to be invisible, caused the hound to stop and look at him, and then walk away. Jon was not important enough to be noticed as a problem. He was becoming one anyway. Meanwhile, Littlefinger's investigation had produced a result he was not expecting. He had assumed Jon Rivers was some lordling's byblow placed in the Kingsguard household as a political favor, the kind of arrangement that could be leveraged or ignored. What his people found was a complete absence. No Rivers bastard matching Jon's description anywhere in the Riverlands. No birth record, no sept registration, no corresponding household in any lord's service. The name was fabricated. Someone with Ned Stark's access and care had constructed it. Littlefinger sat with this fact and smiled his particular smile, the one that appeared when he found something he had not known he was looking for. That evening, he sent Varys a message framed as a social inquiry, asking if Varys knew anything about Stark's young man. Varys read it and did not reply for 3 days. 3 days, in Varys's language, meant, "This is something I already knew. I am deciding what to do with you knowing it too." Ned had confirmed enough. Cersei's children, Joffrey's parentage, the reason Jon Arryn had died, the reason Littlefinger could not be trusted. He knew, with the particular cold clarity he brought to facts, he could not change, that he would not survive this court if he moved against the Lannisters openly, and that he could not survive it if he did not. He sent for Barristan Selmy at night, and when Barristan arrived, Ned said, "I think the letter may need to be opened soon. I need you to be ready." Barristan had been ready since the second week of Jon's training, when he first stood in that corridor and understood what he was looking at. He told Ned this, not reproachfully but factually, the way knights speak to each other when there is no time for anything else. Then he asked the question directly. Is the boy Rhaegar's? Ned looked at him for a long time. He is Rhaegar's son and Lyanna's. He was born in Dorne. Lyanna named him Aegon. Barristan went very still. Not from shock. He had been expecting it, had known it for weeks at some level that lived below certainty. The stillness came from something different, the specific quality that arrives when a thing you feared turns out to be both worse and more important than you feared. He's the heir, Barristan said. He's everything, Ned said, which is why no one can know. 2 days later, Ned moved against Cersei. He gave her the chance to flee with her children. He named what he knew about Joffrey's parentage. He was Ned Stark about it. Direct, without theater, with the full weight of what he was offering her, and what it would cost him to offer it. Cersei did not flee. By nightfall, Ned was in the dungeons of the Red Keep on Joffrey's orders. Jon heard from a Kingsguard brother, delivered as a matter of form. The Hand's household being under scrutiny, Jon's movements would be restricted. Jon's face did not change. He went directly to Barristan's chambers and stood in the doorway and said one word. Sir. Barristan looked at him. Then he went to the lockbox. He placed the sealed letter in Jon's hands. Your father told me to open this only if he was dead. He is not dead yet. But I think it is time. Jon looked at the envelope. The dual seal meant nothing to him. The wolf he knew. But the faint shape beneath it, the three-headed dragon pressed in wax, was unfamiliar. The second seal? Barristan said, that is the three-headed dragon. Jon looked up at him. Open it, Barristan said. Barristan gave Jon an hour alone with the letter. He did not explain why. He simply left the room and closed the door and stood in the corridor for a long time, listening to nothing, which was all there was to hear. When he returned, Jon was in the same chair, the letter flat on the table before him, his hands folded on top of it. He had not moved. He was not the same person. Ned's letter was characteristically Ned, plain, precise, without flourish or apology. It named the parents, named the tower in Dorne, named what Lyanna had asked Ned to promise, and why the promise had required 16 years of silence. It described the dual claim, the Stark blood through Lyanna, the Targaryen blood through Rhaegar, and stated plainly that Jon was the legitimate heir to the Iron Throne if the secret marriage could be proven. Ned believed it could. The letter ended the way Ned ended everything. Directly. You did not need this truth to be the person you already are, but you need it now. So, here it is. Do what is right. You always have. Jon read that last sentence 4 times. Barristan sat across from him and did not speak first. You suspected, Jon said. I knew before I read it. I knew from the portrait. I knew from watching you fight. How? Prince Rhaegar was the finest swordsman I ever saw before you. He had the same quality, the sense that every fight is real, that the person across from him matters. Most men learn to fight. He and you both learn to protect. Jon sat with this. Then, what does this require of me? Nothing yet. Your father, Lord Stark, is alive. We save him first. Everything else can wait. Barristan Selmy had served every king since Aegon Fee. 50 years of oaths, each one sworn to the crown and to the realm, and to the man wearing it, and he had kept every one. In courts that did not deserve them, under kings who did not merit them, because an oath did not become negotiable simply because the man you swore to became unworthy. He believed this completely. He stood. He went to one knee. John said, very quickly, "Don't. I have to. I've been waiting to do this since the night I stood in Rhaegar's solar and swore to protect his line and watched the Mad King destroy it." He bowed his head. After a moment, John put his hand on the old knight's shoulder. "Get up," he said. "We need to get my father out of that dungeon first." He said father without hesitation, which told Barristan everything he needed to know about what the letter had and hadn't changed. Somewhere in the Red Keep, a Lannister guard was changing shift. The window was closing by the hour. 6 minutes. That was the window the guard rotation gave them in the lower dungeon corridor, and John moved through it with the speed of months of training. Barristan had memorized these passages over decades of Kingsguard service. The castle's skeleton, below the places where lords walked. John found the cell on the second try. Ned was alive, physically intact, sitting on the floor with his back to stone. When he saw John, his first expression was not relief. It was alarm, because John being here meant John knew, which meant the letter was open, which meant everything Ned had tried to prevent had arrived ahead of schedule. He said John's real name, Aegon, very quietly, just once, as if testing how the words sounded in the air outside his own head. John said, "Don't. I'm still John. We can argue about names when you're out of this cell." Ned's expression held for a moment. Then it broke into something that was almost a smile, and John recognized it as Ned. The way grief and pride could occupy the same face in the same instant. They could not get him out. This was the fact that reorganized everything. A second lock on the cell added recently that Barristan's key didn't fit. The Lannister guard on this corridor doubled by Cersei personally. Ned stated this in the 90 seconds they had before the window closed, and then he said the thing he had worked out sitting in the dark. The moment Cersei knew what the letter contained, John was worth more dead than alive to every Lannister in Westeros. "Go north," Ned said. "Get out of this city. Find Robb. The truth can wait until you're safe enough to use it." "I'm not leaving you here." "You already left," Ned said. "That's the whole point." They were 2 days too slow. John and Barristan were moving through the servant passages beneath the keep when the bells of the Great Sept began to ring. Not the measured toll of ceremony, but the particular peal of a public spectacle, the bells that called a crowd. Barristan understood before John did. He grabbed John's arm and held him back from the exit that would have taken him to the plaza. John heard the crowd a moment later. He understood a breath after that. He did not make a sound. They stood together in the dark passage, the old knight and the boy he had sworn to protect, and the bells continued. And Jon Snow breathed once, very slowly, and then turned away from the sound. His face was entirely controlled. His hands were not. Barristan kept his grip on the boy's arm until the shaking stopped. "North," Barristan said. "Tonight." "Yes." They walked. Behind them, the bells did not stop. They rode as a merchant and his guard. Barristan had done this before, traveled unnamed through a country that would have known him instantly, in service of things that could not be explained to a checkpoint. John learned it quickly. He had always been good at going unnoticed when he chose to. The road was where Barristan finished the education he had started in the Kingsguard yard, the parts that walls with ears had made impossible. He told John everything he had known about Rhaegar, the quality of his mind, the weight of prophecy he believed himself born to carry, and the specific flaw in him that Barristan loved and mourned simultaneously. that Rhaegar believed his own cause so completely he forgot to ask whether the people around him had agreed to carry it with him. He said this not as a warning about Rhaegar, but as a warning about Jon. Jon listened. He didn't argue. He asked once, "Was he a good man?" Barristan was quiet for a long time. "He was the best man I knew, and he still caused a war. Whether that makes him good, I'm no longer sure." Jon rode with this for a mile without speaking. The Riverlands showed them what the war had already done. Lannister outriders had been through here, burning, taking, leaving the evidence of how armies moved through land that belonged to other people. Jon stopped at one burned farmstead. A farmer, his wife, 2 children. He pulled the bodies clear for burial without asking Barristan's permission to delay their travel. Barristan waited without comment. When they rode on, Jon said, "My father's cause." Barristan said, "Robb Stark's cause." "Your father's war." "Your inheritance." Jon said nothing. He rode harder. At a way-station inn south of the Trident, a stout man in a merchant's coat was waiting at the stable door. He looked like an accident. He was not. Varys told Jon he knew who he was, that 2 other people in the world held the same knowledge, that one of them was now dead. Then he reached into his coat and produced a document. Old paper, water-stained at the edges, written in High Valyrian. A witnessed record of the secret marriage of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen to Lyanna Stark, conducted in Dorne, in the year before the rebellion. Jon looked at Barristan. Barristan looked at the document, then at Varys, with the expression of the man who has spent his career surrounded by people hiding things, and has just found someone hiding the exact right thing. Jon took the document. His hands were steady this time. The sentries didn't recognize him at first. Jon let this pass without comment. He was brought to the command tent, and the flap opened, and Robb Stark looked up from a map table, and for one moment he simply looked. Relief and anger, and something behind both of those. Something that had been sitting on a long shelf, waiting. Then he crossed the tent and pulled Jon into an embrace that said everything the months had held. When they stepped back, Robb looked at him the way siblings look at each other after danger has passed, wanting to be angry and too relieved to manage it properly. "Where have you been?" "King's Landing. That's the Watch. I never joined the Watch." Jon said it plainly. "Father had another plan. I'll explain. But first, who else is in this tent, and how much do you trust them?" Robb glanced at the lords at his back. "Some of them. Send the others out." Jon told him everything. The letter, the portrait corridor, the dungeon, the marriage document Varys had produced at the inn. He did not frame any of it as a claim. He framed it as information Robb needed in order to make decisions. When he finished, the tent was quiet. Robb said, "You're telling me you're the legitimate heir to the Iron Throne? I'm telling you it's documented. I'm not telling you what to do with it." Robb was silent. Then, "Father knew the whole time." Not a question. "He knew." Robb nodded, the slow processing nod of a man rearranging every conversation he ever had with his father. All the silences that now had weight, all the looks that now had meaning. "He sent you to the best knight in the realm. He sent me to the man who served my grandfather." Catelyn had gone very still the moment Jon said Rhaegar's son and Lyanna's. She had not moved since. The wound she had carried for 20 years The bastard on the threshold, the shame she bore on Ned's behalf, the resentment calcified into something she had stopped examining, was being rearranged in real time. And she was doing the rearranging with the same controlled dignity she brought to everything. After a long silence, she said to Rob and not to John, "I owe him an apology." She could not yet say it to John directly, but she said it, which was already more than anyone in the room had expected. "Then I will not let this court destroy another Stark boy in the service of a Targaryen claim. If the claim is used, it must be used carefully." She looked at John. "By people who understand what it will cost." He looked back. Something between them shifted, not warmth yet, but the ground where warmth might eventually stand. Varys presented the mathematics without sentiment. Robb's war was a northern war. It had the North's loyalty and the Riverland's sympathy, and nothing south of that. A documented Targaryen claimant, trained by Barristan Selmy, changed a ledger. For every lord between the Neck and Dorne, who was waiting to see which side had the better story. The Tyrells, uncommitted and looking for a king. The Martells, who had never forgiven the Lannisters for Elia and her children. The Stormlords, who had no love for Joffrey and no reason to keep backing him. None of them would march for Robb Stark. They might march for Aegon Targaryen. Robb listened to this with his hands flat on the table. Then he looked at Jon. "Is that what you want?" Jon said, "I want to know what you want. I want my father avenged." "Then let's do this the right way." Barristan Selmy offered his sword to Robb. Not to Jon, to Robb. Because Robb commanded this army, and Barristan understood that a chain of command was a principle, and not a hierarchy. Robb accepted it with the look of a young man trying not to show how much it meant. Barristan took his place at the table, and within 10 minutes had dismantled 3 of Robb's tactical assumptions in a way that left the room both irritated and grateful. The council had not fully settled when Varys sent his raven south to Sunspear. His message to Doran Martell was brief. The heir is real, documented, alive, and currently in the Riverlands. He attached a copy of the marriage record. 4 days later the reply came, not from Doran, but from Oberyn, his younger brother, the Red Viper, writing in a hand that practically vibrated with held energy. "We are coming north. Don't start the war without us." Jon read it and looked at Barristan. "Prince Oberyn was one of your mother's closest friends," Barristan said. Jon looked at the letter again. He said, "My mother," quietly, "to no one the way you test a door to see if it will open." 6 months ago the word had been a wall. Now it was something else entirely. A room he hadn't yet walked into that had been there all along, waiting for him to find it. Outside the tent, the camp went about its ordinary business. Fires lit, horses watered, lords arguing over maps. The war had not changed its shape yet, but the thing that would change it was already moving south on the King's Road, wearing Dornish colors, riding fast. Oberyn Martell arrived at the camp gate with 300 Dornish spears and the barely leashed energy of a man who had been saving something for 20 years and could finally feel the end of the wait. He walked into the command tent and did not look at Robb first. He looked at Jon, and then he walked around him, slowly, which was rude enough that 2 of Robb's lords put hands to sword hilts. Robb stopped them with a look. Oberyn completed his circuit and stood in front of Jon and was quiet for a moment. "You have her eyes," he said, "not the color. Lyanna's eyes were gray. The quality. The way they take in a room like everything in it matters." Jon didn't know what to say to that. He said, "You knew her." She was extraordinary. Something shifted in Oberon's voice. A register drop, old grief worn smooth by handling. So was your father. They were both too young. All of it was too young. He said the last sentence the way people say true things they have said many times in private and never aloud. John heard it for what it was. The military terms were stated without diplomacy, which was the only way Oberon stated anything. Doran's full commitment. 20,000 Dornish soldiers, formal Martell recognition of the Targaryen claim, had one condition. Gregor Clegane, not killed in battle, tried and executed by acknowledged royal authority. The distinction was not symbolic, it was the whole point. Doran wanted the record. Oberon wanted the mountain to know, in the moment it ended, that it was not a fight, but an accounting. Jon said he understood. He said it plainly, without adding that he agreed to it as a condition. He agreed to it because it was right. Oberon studied him. Then, yes, you do understand. Rhaegar would have understood too. A pause. He just would have said it better. 5 days later, Loras Tyrell rode into camp under the Highgarden banner, ostensibly as a courier, actually as a scout. The Tyrells would not commit to a claim that did not address the succession question. Marjorie needed a king, not a war. Laura said it with the bluntness of a man trained to champion rather than to court. The reach follows the crown, he said. If you want the reach, someone has to be wearing it. He looked at Jon directly. Jon looked at Barristan. Barristan's face was entirely still. I'm not interested in a crown, Jon said. Loras said, then you're the first Targaryen I've ever heard say that. I'm the first one left. The silence that followed was the longest in the conversation. Barristan had trained Jon to fight the way Barristan himself fought, economically, protectively, always knowing where everyone else was in the field. Jon fought at Robb's right flank, and within the first hour, the lords around him began to notice something that could not have been taught in any yard. He was not spectacular. He was certain. In a battle, certain is worth more than spectacular. When the line held against a Lannister cavalry push that should have broken it, when the gap closed from the inside, before anyone gave an order to close it, the great Jon Umber looked at the man holding the right and said, afterward, to no one in particular, that bastard boy. Where did Robb find him? At the center of the engagement, Barristan Selmy at 70 was a diminished but still extraordinary thing to watch. He had lost speed. He had lost nothing else. He killed 4 men so cleanly, with such economy, that the soldiers around him stopped fighting for a moment to look, which was a tactical problem and a genuine wonder simultaneously. Afterward, Oberyn found him cleaning his sword beside a dead horse and said, I always wondered what it would look like, the greatest knight in the world, fighting in a just cause. Now you know, Barristan said. Now I know. Oberyn tilted his head toward where Jon was visible across the field. How long has he been like that? He was born like that. I just didn't waste what he came with. Among the Lannister prisoners was a senior officer who refused to negotiate until he had spoken to the man on the right flank. When Jon was brought into the command tent, the officer, old enough to have ridden in the rebellion, looked at his face and went white. He was quiet for a long moment. Who are you? Jon gave his name. The officer said, Your real name? Jon looked at Robb. Robb said, He's Jon. The officer looked between them. I fought beside Rhaegar Targaryen at the Trident. That man's son is standing in this tent. Silence. Then, I'm not going to tell Tywin Lannister what I saw today, but you should know I am not the only man who will look at your face and remember. Tywin did not dismiss it. A man who dismissed things was not the man who bent the realm to Lannister will for 40 years. He sat with the intelligence, second-hand, from a source he trusted, and analyzed. A documented Targaryen heir of Rhaegar and Lyanna, trained by Barristan's Selmy, operating inside Robb Stark's army with Dornish and possibly Tyrell support. This was not a war of northern independence anymore. This was a coalition that would, eventually and certainly, overwhelm them. The question was not whether Robb could be beaten in the field. The question was whether the coalition could be prevented from fully forming. He named 4 actions to his council: kill the rumor, kill the heir, fracture the coalition, negotiate. And he paused here with the particular stillness of a man naming an option he dislikes. Before he said it, if nothing else worked, his council had never heard Tywin Lannister say, negotiate. The word landed in the room like a stone in still water. 3 assassination teams went north. The first was intercepted by Varys' network before it crossed the narrow sea. The second reached the Riverlands and found a protective escort around Jon that looked like a standard camp detail, and was not. Barristan had been expecting this for weeks. The third team met Oberyn Martell personally. Their leader lived long enough to send a message back. Don't try this again. Tywin received the failure reports without visible reaction, crossed assassination off the list, and moved to option 3. He sent Tyrion under a white banner, because Tyrion was the only Lannister a hostile camp might not kill on sight, and because Tywin trusted his intelligence, even when he didn't trust his judgment. Tyrion arrived and looked at the assembled faces in the command tent. Robb, Catelyn, Barristan, Oberyn, Jon, and took the full measure of what his father had sent him to unmake. Then he looked at Jon specifically, for long enough that it was noticeable. He sat down without being invited. Northern independence. Joffrey removed in favor of Tommen. Full pardon for every lord who fought. If Robb Stark disbands his army, and the Targaryen claim is formally abandoned, he delivered it with complete neutrality. I was sent to negotiate this proposal. I was not sent to recommend it. Jon said, why are you telling us that? Tyrion said, because I looked at your face, and I know exactly what my father is afraid of, and I think he's right to be. Robb wanted to accept, not because the terms were good, they were not, but because they were enough. The North's independence. Joffrey gone. His lord's home. He said so plainly, the way Robb said everything. Catelyn agreed with him, and she looked at Jon when she said it, which she had not done before. Whatever is owed, she said. But I will not see another Stark boy destroyed in the service of a Targaryen claim. Oberyn flatly refused. The Dornish terms included the Mountains trial, which Tywin's offer did not mention and never would. Barristan said nothing, waiting. Loras, present as Tyrell envoy, said the Reach would follow whatever Jon decided. It was the most direct statement anyone in the room had made about who was actually in charge. Jon did not accept. His reason was not ambition. It was the burned farmstead, the farmer, his wife, 2 children, and every farmstead between the camp and King's Landing that had burned for the same cause in the same way, by the same order. He said, Tywin's offer ends this war. It does not prevent the next one. Joffrey's removal means Cersei governs through Tommen. That means Tywin governs the same court. different names on the papers. The people who burned, they burn again. He stopped. Then, my father kept a secret for 16 years to protect me. I won't use it to protect the people who made the secret necessary. He sent Tyrion back with a counter. The Mountains Trial, full removal of Lannister political control from any regency. A council-based governance structure for the South. Tyrion read it in the saddle on his way out of camp. He nodded slowly, as if something had been confirmed. That evening, Barristan found Jon alone in the training yard, still working through forms. The way Jon worked through things he couldn't solve any other way. Your father would have made that decision, Barristan said. Ned? Rhaegar. He waited for Jon to look at him. That is not a compliment. Rhaegar always chose the larger cause over the immediate people. He believed so completely in the realm that he didn't notice the people in it suffering for his belief. Jon was quiet. Then, the farmers. Yes? Then, how do I do both? Barristan said. That is the question every king has failed to answer since Aegon the Conqueror, but you are the first in 300 years to ask it before taking the throne. A pause. That may be enough, or it may not. But it is where we start. South of the camp, Tywin Lannister read the counter-proposal and began to plan the largest military engagement of the war. Varys produced the standard from somewhere. No one asked how, because it was Varys, and the question of whether to raise it was a military decision. Wearing a political disguise, Barristan said it plainly. Every lord in both armies who was still uncertain about his allegiance would have a visible answer the moment it went up. Robb said it was Jon's choice. Jon looked at it for a long time. 3 heads, red on black. The dragon of the house he had not known was his. He thought of the farmer's yard. He thought of Ned, alone in the solar, candle burned down, writing the letter that named him. He thought of an old knight, going to one knee in a small room, and the gray head bowed over a promise 2 decades old. Put it up, he said quietly. It went up, and the sound from the Allied ranks was something between a cheer and something older. The sound an army makes when it has been given a reason rather than an order. Tywin's pincer nearly worked. He was the better strategist, and the 2 Lannister columns came close to closing. Jon and Barristan fought at the center of the Allied line, visible by design, because the standard required the person it represented to be seen. Barristan stayed within sword reach throughout, both his oath and his function, because nothing that got past the center reached Jon without first passing through him. The battle turned when Oberyn's Dornish cavalry executed a flank movement no Lannister commander had planned for, because no Dornish cavalry had fought north of the Red Mountains in living memory. The pincer became a rout. Tywin pulled his main force south intact, but with the campaign's shape broken. Jon stood in the field after, blood drying on his arm from a grazing wound, the dragon's standard still flying over him, looking like neither of the things he had been told he was. He looked like himself. Barristan was already with the healers. He had taken a spear in the shoulder in the battle's last minutes, an attack from the wrong angle, the one gap in the protection, and the wound was serious. Not mortal, the healer said. But at his age, with the depth of penetration, she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Jon sat beside him while he was attended. Barristan, in and out of the fever, said something that Jon would turn over for years. I was there when Rhaegar died. I wasn't close enough. I told myself I was following orders. A long pause. I was not following orders. I was afraid. His hand found John's. I have been paying that debt for 20 years. Don't let me die in debt. John said, You're not in debt. You never were. He held the old man's hand. The tent was quiet. Outside, the army buried its dead, and the dragon's standard was still flying. And the war had changed shape again. The army that moved south was unlike anything the realm had seen since the conquest. Northern direwolves beside Dornish spears. Tully trout alongside the three-headed dragon. The son of High Garden somewhere in the column's middle. Because Loras Tyrell had ridden into camp the morning after Tywin's withdrawal, and formally committed the Reach not to Robb, not to the claim, but to the march itself, which was enough for now. Robb rode at the column's head beside Jon, and the lords behind them watched the two of them and understood, without being told, that the world after this war would not resemble the world before it. On the third day, Jon said, When this is over, what do you want? Robb didn't hesitate. Home, the North, free. My family safe. You'll have it. Whatever else this becomes, the North is yours. That is not politics. That is a promise. Robb looked at him sidelong, the way you look at someone you've known your whole life and are still discovering. He said nothing, which, with Robb, meant he believed it. Cersei, in King's Landing, did the one thing no one in the camp had modeled. She made a decision without Joffrey. She sent him to Casterly Rock with a Kingsguard escort, removed the most volatile element from the coming negotiation, and met with the small council herself, and said she would negotiate terms, not surrender. Negotiate. She still held the city, the Blackwater defenses, Tywin's remaining force. But she was also looking at a coalition that included the Martells, the Tyrells, the Tullys, and the last Targaryen heir, and the city's walls had limits that political arithmetic did not. She requested terms through Tyrion. The condition was specific. She would not speak to Aegon Targaryen directly. Only Tyrion. Tyrion brought this to the War Council. Oberyn's response was immediate. A Lannister negotiator meant Lannister-shaped terms, which meant the Mountain walked free in the fine print. He said, if Tyrion negotiated, Dorne withdrew. Robb said, we are not letting the city's population die over who sits at a table. The room was stuck. Jon was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Tyrion, what do you want in exchange for doing this? Tyrion blinked. No one has ever asked me that. I'm asking. A pause. Then, the trial. Gregor Clegane's trial. Real, on the record, under acknowledged authority. That is the Dornish condition, and they are right. Oberyn went completely still. You'd deliver the Mountain, he said. Tyrion said, I've wanted that trial since before you had a cause to fight for. Nobody spoke. Something in the tent had shifted, and no one was entirely sure who had just won. Tyrion walked into King's Landing under his own name, alone, and the city did not kill him, which he regarded as a reasonable start. Cersei was waiting in the Hand's Tower, in their father's room, surrounded by his documents. The performance of court was gone from her face. There was no audience. There was only the two of them and the fact that she had lost, which she did not say and did not need to. Tell me what he wants, she said. The realm to survive, the people in it to stop dying, the trial. Which trial? You know which. She was quiet. Her pieces were on the table between them. Tywin's remaining force, the city walls, Joffrey safe at the Rock, and she had laid them there with complete clarity, which told Tyrion that she was not performing strength. She was inventorying what she had left. He had never seen her do that before. Gregor Clegane is my father's instrument. Father won't. Father's position is not guaranteed in any settlement. If the city falls in a battle, father has no position. Silence. Then, what does Aegon Targaryen offer? Tommen on the throne, with a council. You are not regent, but you are Tommen's mother, and no treaty removes that. He paused. The Lannister name survives. He said the last sentence carefully, because it was what she had always wanted most, underneath everything else. He watched her face. He watched the moment she understood he was giving her the true version, and not the negotiator's version, because they were siblings and she could tell the difference. And because the city's population required this conversation to succeed, she signed the preliminary terms in her own hand, witnessed by Tyrion and a Lannister maester, the most consequential document of the war, produced without a battle at the gates, without the city burning, without the dead piling in the streets. Then Tyrion brought it to Tywin. Tywin read it. He looked at Tyrion, and in a voice of such cold precision, it was worse than any rage. A Targaryen sits the Iron Throne over my dead body. That may be how this ends then. Get out of this room. Tyrion looked at his father, at the face that had shaped every fear and every ambition of his life, and said, I'll be outside the walls with the people who just ended the war you started. He left. The door closed. Tywin stared at it with the expression of a man encountering the limit of his own will for the first time in 60 years and finding he had no tools for standing at the limit. Jon rode to the mud gate alone. The War Council found out after he had already gone, and the arguments that followed required Robb to physically place himself between Barristan and a horse. Barristan, still 4 weeks from full recovery, was prepared to ride anyway. Robb stopped him by saying, he knows what he's doing. Barristan said, he always thinks he knows what he's doing. Robb said, in this case, he's right. He did not look entirely certain. Jon called up to the walls and said, tell Lord Lannister I would speak with him. Not king to lord, man to man. There was a long wait. A Lannister herald appeared and said, Lord Tywin did not negotiate at gates. Jon said, I know. Ask him to start. Tywin came out alone. This surprised everyone watching from both sides, which was the point. Tywin respected one quality above all others, the quality of acting without asking permission. He recognized it because it was his own. They met 20 yards from the gate on horseback, and the armies on both sides went very quiet. Your daughter has agreed to terms that preserve your family name, your house's holdings, and your grandson's life, Jon said. You are preventing those terms. I'd like to understand why. Tywin studied him with the attention he reserved for things that merited it. You are very young, yes. Your father was very young too. Which father? A brief silence. Tywin said both. It was not a compliment and not an insult. It was an observation, which from Tywin was the most honest thing available. Jon made the offer then, the one he had discussed with no one, not Robb, not Barristan, not Varys. He offered Tywin the position of Hand of a King under the new settlement, not pardon, function. He said the realm needed the skills that built it, as much as the reform that was coming. A council without someone who understood the mechanics of governance was a beautiful document that would fail in practice within a year. He said this without flattery, because John did not flatter. He said true things. Tywin was quiet for 60 seconds. He looked at the dragon standard. He looked at Jon's face, and in that face, not Rhaegar, not Lyanna, not Ned, but something assembled from all three, and then made into something new by 16 years in the north, and 1 year with an old knight in a Kingsguard yard. He saw the thing he had spent his life trying to build in his children, and never quite managed. A person who would not compromise on what was right, but understood what was real. The trial will be real, Tywin said. I know. I will not attend it. No one asked you to. Tywin turned his horse around and rode back through the gate without another word. The gate did not close. 15 minutes later, a Lannister herald appeared, carrying a white banner. The Iron Throne was not in the room. Jon had it moved to an antechamber and covered, on the grounds that a trial required a court, and a court required the appearance of impartiality. And a man conducting a trial from the Iron Throne was conducting it from a conclusion. The lords who attended noticed this. Several of them made note of it. None of them said anything. Jon presided from a chair at the center of 7 judges drawn from the 7 regions of the realm. The format excluded trial by combat, specifically, formally, on the record, on the grounds that the purpose of justice was establishing truth, rather than determining which combatant was more frightening. The Lannister contingent in the gallery shifted in their seats. The Dornish contingent went very still. Oberyn Martell testified. He had been saving this for 20 years, and he gave it everything it deserved. Precision, detail, control. He said the names, Elia's name, the children's names, what was done, who did it. The hall was completely silent, not the silence of shock, but of recognition. Everyone in the room knew the story. This was the first time it had been told in a room with authority behind it. When Oberyn finished, Jon said, "Is there any question of the identity of the man who committed these acts?" No one spoke. Gregor Clegane, present under guard, filling the space of 3 men, said nothing. His silence was not denial. Jon said, "Then we proceed to judgment." The verdict was not in question. What mattered, what Doran Martell, sitting in the gallery with his hands folded, understood completely, was that it was not in question publicly, on the record, under acknowledged authority, in a room full of witnesses. This was the thing Doran had been patient for. Not the death, the acknowledgement. The document that said this happened, and the realm named it wrong and did not look away. The judgment was given, the execution order signed, the hall's great doors opened. Barristan Selmy walked in slowly, his shoulder wound still showing in the set of his body, carrying no cane despite his healer's instructions. The hall went quiet in a different way, not judicial quiet, but the quiet of people who recognize something historic moving through a room. He reached Jon and looked at him, and Jon stood. "I am ready to swear," Barristan said, loudly enough for the room. "Not here. Not yet. When? When the realm has had time to choose rather than to follow. I will not ask anyone to swear to something they haven't had the chance to refuse." Barristan held his gaze. Rhaegar would have done it differently. I know. A pause. Was Rhaegar right? The room waited. Barristan said quietly, "No, he wasn't." Jon nodded. He looked out at the assembled lords, the Dornish and the Northern, the Tyrell Gold and the Lannister Crimson and the Tully Blue. All of them present in a room that had been full of different colors when it served a different purpose. And he said, We have work to do. Rob left in autumn. He rode north through a kingdom, learning what peace felt like, and it felt nothing like what he had expected. He had thought it would feel like victory. It felt like the morning after a long night, quiet, slightly cold, full of things requiring attention. He reached Winterfell on a gray afternoon. The gates opened, and he sat on his horse and looked at the stone walls and the dire wolf flags and did not speak. Then he dismounted and walked to the godswood alone. He knelt at the heart tree and thought about Ned, who had gone south to serve a friend and never come home, who had sent a boy south to a knight and changed the world. And he thought that the most important thing Ned Stark had ever done was trust. Barristan Selmy did not retire. He took a role in the new governance with no formal title, advisor, available at any hour, present at every significant meeting, silent in most of them, and necessary in the ones that counted. His shoulder healed imperfectly. The stiffness was a reasonable price. He trained no new squires. He trained Jon still, not in sword work, but in the thing no yard could teach. How to hear what was being said beneath what was being said. How to sit in a room full of powerful people and ask the question that cleared the smoke. He had been the greatest knight in the realm. He was, in these years, the greatest mentor in it. Jon kept the letter. He had read it so many times. The paper was soft along its folds. In the first year of the new settlement, before any formal coronation, before the realm had fully decided what to call the arrangement, he added a line at the bottom, in his own hand, below Ned's final sentence. Ned had written, "Do what is right. You always have." Jon wrote, "I am still trying. I think that is what you actually meant." He folded it and placed it back in Barristan's old lockbox, the same box that had carried the sealed letter from Winterfell to King's Landing, from Barristan's keeping to Jon's hands. He kept it on his work desk. Visitors always noticed it and never asked about it because it sat with the particular weight of something too important to explain to a stranger. Barristan, on one of his evening visits, glanced at it. He was right, Jon said, about all of it. Ned usually was. That was the tragedy, and the whole point. The point, being right was never enough in the world that was, so he made a different one. Barristan looked at him. "You're living in it." Outside the window, King's Landing was lit for evening, loud, imperfect, alive, full of people who did not know or care about letters in lockboxes or the names that dragons used to carry, who were simply getting on with the ordinary work of being alive in a world that had almost broken and held instead. The sound of it came through the window and filled the room, that enormous, ordinary sound, and Jon sat inside it and did not move for a very long time.